If you want more information about the ego and a little bit about ego development theory, click the description below.
There's no separation between me and those projections. My thoughts influence the world, and the world is perceived by my persona, and I have to disengage from that persona in order to not continue to perpetuate different projections. It's a game of unhooking yourself, unplugging yourself from the holographic matrix that is reality.
So if you're here, you want to learn about the 9 levels of ego development theory. I'm making this because I don't want to have to make a preface for each level's video about what levels are and why they help and what to look for. It will be better overall if I just get all of this out of the way in one video, and then move on to the main series. Now, I mentioned this quite a bit. I'm not a psychologist or a therapist. I'm just a guy who overthinks everything and overanalyzes everything. So overall, this is just my glorified opinion, and I'm going to explain it through my own framework. Will I be accurate? I guess that's up for you to decide.
How do you know what's good for me? That's my opinion!
The goal is to use this as a tool to better help understand the flow of thoughts and feelings better, at least in a very general sense. I want you to keep this in mind, however. Anytime you attempt to look outwards to understand others, you are making a presumption that you somehow understand what other people are thinking. All extrospection is glorified imagination. This means that all levels are glorified imaginations. While understanding how others think and feel is absolutely crucial in understanding yourself, that doesn't automatically mean that you will be accurate.
Karate, judo, sumo, samurai.
Nissan, Honda, Mitsubishi, Subaru,
Harikari, tsunami, kamikaze, banzai.
Yamaha, Nikon, Casio, Iwa.
Luke, get your hands off Manny's girlfriend.
That's not my girlfriend.
What? What were we just talking about?
The Elizabethan Society. My first meeting's tonight.
I am so confused.
It's plain as day. This woman is here to swing with me.
So the big question, why ego development theory? Ego development theory is theoretical, meaning it hasn't been verified. It is a measure of awareness, not necessarily IQ. This means that just because you're smart doesn't automatically mean that you're aware. And the reverse is true. Just because you're more aware doesn't mean you're smart. What this also means is that every level isn't automatically better from one to the other. At each level, you get certain buffs and debuffs that other levels tend to forget about and don't understand. So that means that people at different levels don't really communicate or understand each other well, and their own systems may be flawed and they don't realize or recognize it.
You want to go right now? Huh. Guess I could do that. Okay. Okay, let's go. He said, okay. Okay, let's go.
So, what is awareness then? The best analogy I've ever heard is having awareness is like driving a car. While driving, you're supposed to focus in and lock in on the road ahead of you. But to drive well, you also need to consider the signs, the roads, the signals, the exits, and generally where the cars are around you, so that when you change lanes without being able to fully see, you can do so safely. In this light, awareness is the recognition of the outside systems and patterns around you. But that's not the whole story. You also need to know how to drive a car, what speed to go, where the brakes are, and how to actually drive to be safe. The better you know your car, the better you can fix it. You hear a funny sound that is off. It's barely audible, but it makes you feel like something is wrong within yourself. So awareness is also the recognition of the inside systems and patterns within yourself. That means that there are technically 2 halves of awareness. One half of trying to understand yourself and how you work downwards into the core sense of self, and the other half of trying to expand outwards and try to understand how others work towards the infinite. This requires a person to have introspection and, a rare word, extrospection. And you notice a pattern that as you try to understand yourself, you have to compare yourself to others. And as you try to understand others, you have to compare them to yourself. There is a common story about how parents will have a kid, and then the parents will reminisce on themselves growing up. Then they may think, I raised a miniature version of myself, and now I understand why my parents did what they did. When you reminisce, you're using introspection. Then when you think about what your parents did, you're using extrospection. And then you're thinking about how they raised you, which is also extrospection. And then you're like, oh, I get why I am the way that I am. That's also introspection. And so what happens is that you have this effect where as you learn and take in new information, as your awareness expands, they generally grow simultaneously, but they don't have to. And we can talk more about that later. While doing this, I'm going to try to focus on the introspection half. What are you potentially thinking? What are you potentially feeling? And what potential causes and effects lead up to your end conclusions? Just know that the way that introspection and extrospection are inextricably linked together, I won't be able to completely avoid extrospection. I'm going to have to do it to better clarify introspection.
Trust is one of them, especially trust in loved ones, family members, which is why betrayal by a family member is really catastrophic, because it destabilizes your past, right? All the memories you have. It destabilizes your present. It destabilizes your future. It shakes your faith in human beings, including yourself. And everything collapses. And that's an ego death.
I have a gripe with the whole levels community brought on by home math. And funny enough, home math is where I initially learned all of this from. Growing levels and raising awareness is not going to save the day. Imagine you go swimming. You decide that you want to hold your breath. The longer you hold it, the more difficult it is to stay under the water. You have a pain tolerance threshold, and as you reach that threshold, eventually you burst back up to try to catch your breath. The pain was too much.
Because drowning isn't just biology, it's psychological hell. When you first inhale water, it's agony, burning. Your throat's on fire, your lungs feel like they're being shredded, you're choking, convulsing, and there's nothing you can do.
The effort you take to control your breath underwater, that is your inner awareness overtaking your pain tolerance to stretch yourself past your normal limits. And you have two sections to this dynamic. The part where you're mentally holding your breath, and then the exact moment where you can't take it anymore and you try to breathe again. Ego development theory is made by people who like thinking about psychology, mental illness, personality, and awareness. And the people who study and talk about this information like to think and form conclusions about how all of this works together and connects together. So this whole system is locked in an ecosystem by the people who just like to think about it. Everyone who talks about levels then tends to only ever consider the part where you hold your breath. Everyone, and I mean everyone, forgets about the instance where you need to come up for air. And because of that, a lot of the channels that talk about raising awareness and consciousness kind of get lost in the sauce about the depth of what people should go towards.
This moment is the divine moment. This self, the self of Godhead. As we expand into each quadrant, each line, each level, we engage with every type. We activate every level, every interaction, every perspective in every being. Nothing has ever happened. There is only one experience. There is no story. You are radically free of this constructed reality.
The reason why this is significant is that every thought and emotion you ever think is part of your own personal mental framework. This includes religious beliefs, political stances, your likes and interests, and even the relationships you enjoy. If you go deep enough in the 10 layers of processing, you realize every thought you ever think is technically a belief. Even the way you form words and the way you choose to speak to people, the subtle inflections you use to try to persuade people of your argument, that is technically a belief. Even the letters, even the words themselves, why do we spell words the way that we do? That is technically a belief. And yes, even at level 9, when you experience the sensation of non-duality, that is a mental framework. That is a belief. All mental frameworks are powered by the ego, and technically, a mental framework is the ego, and all the ego is your belief system that is being guarded by two core emotions, pleasure and pain. You can't escape this system. This is how the brain works. This is how consciousness works. This is how dopamine sets our brain patterns into belief patterns. You can't escape the ego. That sense of peace you feel when you finally dissolve your ego, guess what? That sense of peace comes from the ego. What this means is that as a passive ability, humans don't like to change beliefs and try to resist it when given the chance. Many of you who are watching this might be disagreeing with me about my definition of the ego. Congratulations! That resistance or inability to change your belief to my definition, that is the ego. If you are resisting my statement, you are using your ego to fight against my definition and description of ego. It's egoception. The ego isn't a bad thing. But if everything is a mental framework, and everything is a belief system, and if humans don't like change and resist change because of the ego, then how do people change, learn, and grow? Why do people change belief systems? Do people simply become stupid when they decide to believe in God, or vice versa, become atheist? The main flaw of growing levels is that you can't solely think your way into a new belief system of thinking. You can't just use your overwhelming knowledge to hold your breath infinitely. If you try to do this, the new information you acquire simply becomes added into the aggregation of your new mental framework. You'll be a lot smarter, but you won't necessarily increase your awareness. In order to raise awareness, you have to have that emotional instance where you need air. You have to think that you need to change or improve somehow. You have to lose a belief system in the process. You have to have that sensation somewhere within that tells you that the way you believe the world right now is wrong. And you have to change your belief system in the process to find that sense of satisfaction to what should be the correct way to live. You need to include both logic and emotions into your awareness simultaneously. If you don't, you'll be able to know the information, but you won't truly understand, and experience is the best teacher. So, as I describe the levels, I usually will describe the process as a collapse, because it is not just a collapse of ego, it is a collapse of a mental framework and a collapse of a belief system. And this collapse, because it breaks our ego, causing what is called an ego death, makes a decent signpost to see how and why a person changes. And it makes a decent signpost to when someone is growing a level. Generally, people grow levels not necessarily because they want to, but because life events have forced them to look to new solutions, where their previous belief system won't work anymore. Very often, this can be traumatic, because most often, people are forced to change. Very rarely do people give up beliefs willingly.
And it's the thing that the ego collapses into when it collapses, and then it rebuilds the ego. Something like that across time. But that's when an ego death is. Now, there's variants of that, because you can have a voluntary or an involuntary ego death. And a voluntary ego death is when you learn a bunch and you're willing to let go. So that would be your own immolation. It's like you're a phoenix and you're lighting yourself on fire. That's a much better idea, even though it can still be really harsh. The involuntary ego deaths, they're really hard on people. People will do almost anything to stop that from happening, which is partly why they fight to maintain their group fostered axiomatic simplifications. It's not surprising.
And it's not an equal system. Because people are complex, every person is going to have a different pain threshold and have a different event that could potentially cause this shift. Every person will experience a different sensation of disbelief. And therefore, some events are going to seem more dramatic than others, and people will recontextualize it differently. Unfortunately, as with all things about psychology, I will never be able to create an exact system or process of how this happens for everyone individually. You may have noticed people are incredibly complex. And I mean incredibly complex. So for example, I have two people, right? They experience a similar event, they feel a similar emotion, they then think a similar thought, and then exhibit an end conclusion or behavior. This is person 1 running on this equation. This is person 2 running on this equation. You can have two different people having two completely different experiences, but come to the same end conclusion. Logically, this doesn't make sense. I call this process convergence. On the flip side, you change the equations. You can have two different people having very similar experiences, but then coming to different conclusions. This also doesn't make sense. I call this divergence. And it can still get more complicated. But because you can have people living completely separate lives, meet each other in the middle, be buds, and then end up on completely opposite sides of life. I call this perpendicular. This happens all the time in college, where you can have two buds from completely different lifestyles be buds during college, and then separate and go their separate ways afterwards. And then you can have two people who go to the same school, live the same lifestyle, make the same choices, and live the same way, while never truly meeting each other. I call this parallel. Now you might see this and think, observer, that's too simple. You just haven't included all the variables. If we just knew the variables, we could understand the discrepancy. There is a reason I made a video specifically on the atomic layers and the 10 layers of processing. Why did I only emphasize this layer and not the other layers? Because when it comes to psychology, it's literally impossible to know and isolate all the variables. How much of it is nature? How much of it is nurture? And as we age, how much of it is because of genetics and how much of it is because of experience? And this is still just the bare bones of it. It can still become far more complex than this. The flow of thoughts and feelings helps answer some of this, and ego development theory, or levels, helps as well because it helps track an individual's thoughts and intuitions over time, which is something that other personality systems miss. And this is also something that helps answer a lot of the inconsistencies that personality systems have, which is why I use levels as a loose personality system. And it's fascinating because on a large scale, I discovered that at each level, every individual ended up with a sort of similar conclusion and similar motivations around similar philosophies. We'll get there though. This will make more sense as we go deeper into each level throughout the series. But here is a small teaser for context. As we go through, the levels tend to fall in similar patterns where certain levels fall within the realm of similar-ish conclusions. Excluding level 9, because that one is weird. The odd numbers are rational, logical, and physical levels, generally, and the even numbers are emotional, feeling, and spiritual levels, generally. 1, 4, and 7 are stabilizing levels. 2, 5, and 8 are transitory levels. 3, 6, and 9 are holistic levels. And so I'm excited to share this because, as I mentioned, I can't create an exact system of how thoughts and feelings go because every individual is unique. Every event is going to change that flow for you personally. And you have your own atomic level and the 10 layers of processing that I can't see. However, levels gives a general scope of where people are at and what they are potentially thinking at that time. And hopefully by watching this series, you'll have a better understanding of your own inner thoughts and feelings. Hope you're excited and stay tuned. Thank you for watching, and I hope you guys have a fantastic day. Don't forget to like and subscribe.